Welcome on board our very first guest for today. Remember, like I said, our topic is investing for the middle age group, the ones in their 40s and 50s. And I have with me Kirtan Shah, the co-founder and CEO of SRE Wealth. Kirtan, thank you so much for taking our time and joining us today on ET Now and on The Money Show. You know, like I flagged off in the beginning, right? This is a juncture where we are 10-15 years into earning our own money, managing our own money, but we're also just 10-15 years away from retirement. So how should this age bracket of individuals really approach money, look at money in your view?
Mubina, thank you so much for having me on the show. Always a pleasure. So Mubina, like we call personal finance is extremely personal. And there can't be very general rules which are applicable to everybody, right? So in my opinion, while we are trying to understand investing, I think each individual should look at his or her investing with respect to his or her own background, her own risk profiles, or her own goals, right? At least in my opinion, there shouldn't be one rule that fits everybody, right? It's because I come across a lot of investors who are 30 years old and they're still extremely conservative with 30 years more to go for retirement. And at the same time, I come across other investors who are, 75 years of age and aggressively investing in equities. So anyone, in my opinion, looking at doing investments should look at their own retirement goals or other related goals, requirements, and specifically try and align all of these investments to risk profile. Now, having said that, let's say if we are particularly talking about somebody who's, let's say, in the age bracket of 50 years, we will try and divide this audience into two. So the first kind of audience will be somebody who's taken care of all the responsibilities like the child education, child marriage, having set up all the home loans that she had. And now the only focus is retirement. For any individual who fits in this particular bracket close to 50 years of age, can take a slightly more aggressive approach to investing, provided the risk appetite of that particular investor fits in here. And the second set of investors, in my opinion, Mubina, would be somebody who would still have, at this age, loan outstanding, or probably a children's marriage goal still pending. Theoretically, these investors should typically look at a more balanced approach than going aggressively like the first set of investors that we spoke about. So I think, having said that, I want to close this question with reiterating the fact that, personal finance is more personal. All of us should look at our own individual backgrounds, risk appetite, and goals. And there can't be one rule that, kind of suffices for everybody in the age of 40 to 50 years.
All right. So you know what? You've classified our audience largely and very correctly into two groups, really. One who does not really have too many responsibilities, or rather they are done with them. For example, their child is independent. They may not necessarily have aged parents to take care of. And the other is the one who still has to go through the whole, routine and responsibility. So let's take that first group. You mentioned that they can be a little more risky. They can take on board some more investments than perhaps the other age group can't. So what are the do's and don'ts for that age group then, the ones who are largely done and dusted with their responsibilities?
So Mubina, like we spoke, somebody who's done and dusted can slightly be on an aggressive pedestal with respect to investing. But of course, having said that, your own inherent risk profile is also extremely important, and not just that you don't have more liabilities on yourself. So let's say, considering somebody who's got done and dusted with most of these responsibilities and is not very conservative, right? So such a client can either be a moderate investor or an aggressive investor. Now, typically what I recommend investors do is, not invest everything into one particular asset class and always follow asset allocation. Now, if I have to kind of suggest this, further break down this asset allocation strategy into three. One you call as the liquidity portfolio, another you call as the core portfolio, and the third you call as the satellite portfolio. Now, the reason why we split this entire asset allocation into three is because it should take care of all of our responsibilities or all of our goals, including the shortest term goal that we might have aligned. So let's say, for example, if there is an investor who fits in the first category that we are talking about, but is moderate in terms of risk profile, typically should have a liquid liquid portfolio of 10% of the total investing, which can be invested in arbitrage funds. 70% of the total investment that the client or the investor needs to do should be in the core portfolio. Now, core portfolio ideally is the portfolio which is typically focusing on the investor's risk profile. So if you are a moderate investor, 70% of your money can go into balance advantage funds, large cap funds or flexi cap funds on the mutual fund side, because that is what will fit into your core risk profile. And then 20% satellite portfolio. And when I say satellite portfolio is that small amount of 20% of your total investments which can go there, which typically gives you that small kicker, but does not really hamper your risk profile as such. So if you are a moderate investor, that 20% of the satellite portfolio can go towards investing in gilt mutual funds or large and mid cap funds. Now that is what somebody who is in the moderate risk profile range can really look at. But somebody who still, is the one who's taking care of all of those goals and is an aggressive investor, the liquid portfolio, which forms 10% part of your overall asset allocation strategy, can still be in arbitrage fund. 70% of the core portfolio here will be different from the moderate one. So over here, you can have larger exposure to equity, which is your flexi cap funds or large and mid cap funds, and also mid cap funds in terms of exposure. But the 20% satellite portfolio can focus more on gilt and credit and small cap funds on the equity side. So, there is no, like we said, there is no one strategy to everybody. But I think somebody who's taking care of all of these goals, moderate can invest in the way I explained, and aggressive also can invest in the way we just discussed. But predominantly what we have to keep in mind is that the overall asset allocation strategy should be, in my opinion, split into liquid, core, and satellite portfolio moving.
I would presume that for somebody who's in the second half of the 50s, let's call it that, well, for this individual, there is a very high possibility that they are largely done with their responsibilities. They've done paying down loans, if any. Their children may be independent, so on and so forth. However, the problem is that they are nearing retirement. So how would you gauge their risk appetite, in terms of the objectives they have, the responsibilities they have to themselves this time around going forward?
So, Mubina, in my opinion, very honestly, a period of 7 to 8 years is a good time frame to have equity exposure. Now, typically, all of us in this business say that, at least have 3 to 5 years in equity. But in my opinion, specifically to that particular group, if you have 7, 8 years still to go for your retirement, I think that's a decent time frame to have equity exposure. But having said that, I think investor at that point in time should actually follow very strict asset allocation. And when I say asset allocation, there are two things why asset allocation will differ to investors to investor. I think the two things that you really need to take care of there is your time frame to retirement and, very importantly, predictability of the cash flow. Now, what do I mean by this is very simple. So let's say if you have more time to retire and you have more predictable cash flows, I think your exposure to equity can be slightly larger. But if at the same time, you have less time to retirement and probably you're not very sure of the cash flows that you are supposed to receive till retirement, your exposure in that case should be much lower to equities. So if at all we can split the investors into these two buckets, I think your understanding about equity investing will be very clear. Larger the time frame and more the predictability of income or cash flow, you can have more exposure to equities. And the inverse should definitely have less exposure to equities moving.
I understood. Well, so far we've spoken about one aspect of personal finance for the 40-50 age group, and that's investing. But personal finance is such a wide umbrella of topics that we sometimes miss on the other parts. So I want to ask you now about the loan bit. Many of us have EMIs that we're paying down. Home loans, homes in a metro are extremely expensive. So it takes the better part of our 30s and 40s to be paying down an EMI. Just as a prudent personal finance practice, Kirtan, would you rather have your clients be done and dusted with their loans and be debt free really by the time they touch 50, Or do you think there's no pressure really for these individuals to start, prepaying their loans and stretching themselves to ensure they turn debt free?
So, Mubina, I think that's a very interesting question, and let's split that into two. So, one thought process, Mubina, here is that, while you are paying your EMIs, you get tax deductions. While you're also paying your EMIs, your rates may be anywhere in the range of 7 to 8%. But at the same time, while you are investing in equities, you can make 10, 12%. So there's definitely this 2, 3% arbitrage for you to continue paying your EMIs, but at the same time, continue investing where you can make more. So that's one thought process. But I think I come from the other side of the thought process where I would like to believe that if you are nearing your retirement or at any point in time, it's always good to be debt free. So if this specific question is to somebody like me, I would rather be in a situation where my debts are taken care of as soon as possible. And once my debt is taken care of, I am relatively extremely free in terms of pressure, in terms of investing opportunities, and a larger part of my investable surplus can then start moving towards investing. So yes, there can be two set of clients who probably may focus more on saving tax and the tax arbitrage that I spoke of, right? Or the investing arbitrage that I spoke of, where your EMIs are at 8%, but you end up making 12%. But I belong to the second side of the camp where I believe that paying off debt is a much better strategy, and then you can predominantly focus investing more and a larger part of the inflows that come to you.
All right. Finally, Kirtan, let's talk about the possibility of loss. Now, when I say possibility of loss, I essentially mean that we live in a time where things get disrupted really fast, unfortunately, due to tech, due to, of course, the fact that we're still in the middle of a health crisis. When you're younger, you still have less to lose. But when you're in your 40s and your 50s, you're very invested in terms of having a family of your own who probably depends on you, in terms of, the debt that you may have taken off, like we just discussed in the previous answer. So you perhaps have a lot more to lose in your 40s and 50s than you probably had in your 20s and 30s. How should these individuals then brace for what could possibly be a bigger hit to their lifestyle, to their family, in case of an income disruption?
So, Mubina, this thanks to Corona over the last 18 months, I think a lot of us have seen something very similar happen to a lot of people out there. The easiest way to get rid of something like this is to make sure that you have an emergency corpus. Now, what do I mean when I say emergency corpus is always try and make sure that all your family expenses plus your EMI that will help you run the show without any income should be taken care of in terms of an emergency corpus. So what I would suggest is always investors to have anywhere in the range of 6 to 12 months of their EMIs or 6 to 12 months of their household expenses, which include their lifestyle expenses, to be kept in an arbitrage fund or a liquid fund. So what happens is tomorrow, for some reason, there is a loss of income, you end up losing a job. At least for the next 12 months, your family expenses plus your EMIs are taken care of. And there is no fight to survival there, where in that 12 month, of course, the individual would have enough time and opportunity to make sure that the cash flow in terms of income is again taken care of. So I think the simplest way to do this is 6 to 12 months of your EMI plus your house expenses and your lifestyle expenses, if are kept in a liquid or an arbitrage fund in the form of an emergency corpus, I think this situation can be very easily driven through, in my opinion.